announcements. Oops, and we're now being recorded. First of all, I wanted to tell you that we will start some form of in-person meeting, right, Ken, beginning with our Christmas bird count ID workshop in December. So we hope that that some people will join us at the senior center, but we'll be giving you more information on that when we get a little closer to the date. Also, I think the last couple of times we've forgotten to say it, but if anybody has any great bird sightings, please put it in the chat, and we will we'll talk about it as at the end of the talk and see what's going on, because we all like to hear about good bird sightings. Ken, who's our speaker in November? I was just going to mention that too.
Our speaker in November will be the two recipients of our small grad students, each one speaking on their part in the overall study on black phoebes. And I don't have all the details right now. I like to wait till the last minute to figure out what's going on. But no, I don't know what their different parts are, but they're going to speak together, one first, one then the second, consecutively, same night.
Great.
Which would be November 3rd Wednesday.
Right.
The date actually just ran out of my mind.
No problem. We can figure that out. And we'll be putting it in the e-newsletter and on the Facebook page and on the website. So stay tuned. Okay, Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce Chris to everybody.
Okay, November 15th. Okay. All righty. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Hang on a second. My prompter went dead, and I have to wake it up. Okay. So thank you for coming. I'm not going to repeat the title of tonight's presentation. It's long. But anyway, we have Chris Conard, he's a natural resource specialist at the Bufferlands in Sacramento County. And he regularly leads field trips for Sac Audubon and serves as county reviewer for eBird. And yeah, past president of the Central Valley Bird Club. And Chris, are you leading tours this year in the Central Valley Bird Club?
Yeah, the symposium. Yeah, the symposium is on, and it's the weekend before Thanksgiving, and you can just Google Central Valley Bird Club or Central Valley Birding Symposium and see how to register and all that. It's a wonderful event. I highly recommend it if you haven't been there.
Good deal. And from a personal point of view, experience, Chris has written some papers in the Central Valley Bird Bulletin, and one of the ones I was rereading a few months ago was on loggerhead shrikes, and that bird was it's kind of a special bird for me because I was a gopher for a grad student when I was a freshman, sophomore. He was doing a study on DDT with shrikes as his top predator. So it's nice to see anyone investigates about shrikes. So yeah, folks, if you get a chance to take a look at the bulletins of the Central Valley Bird Club, you'll find some interesting things in there, especially by Chris. So Chris, I'm going to give you the floor. I'm going to step back, and you're on.
All right, I'm going to share my screen and get going here. Whoop, I'm giving away the whole talk here.
I forgot to mention, folks, put your questions in the chat, and we will have a Q&A at the end of the program.
All right. Well, hi, folks. Thanks for joining. This was an amazing trip. I've been fortunate to travel a bit, and this was one of the highlights. It's a trip that I'll remember for the rest of my life. I went with a group. The that was organized by Jerry Langham. I've gone on several trips with him. He guides for Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours, and he was a professor at Sac State for 38 years. And I've been lucky to be invited on some of his special tours that he does to places that, you know, he really wanted to see. He's primarily guides in Central and South America, but he, you know, wants to visit other places in the world too. So, you know, it's great. You know, it's not, this trip was, it wasn't physically taxing other than, you know, we were 22 days in the field, and it takes 3 days to get there. It took 2 overnight flights to get to Johannesburg, and then another flight to Namibia. And so, you know, it's a lot of doing. And then we were going constantly. The other vent guide is Jeff Lockwood. Was an amazing guide. If you get a chance to go on a trip with him, I highly recommend it. But we had very little downtime. You could take middays off and kind of siesta, but then you're going to miss stuff. So you end up, you know, getting, you know, 5 or 6 hours sleep a night, but it was really worth it. And, you know, just another thing I always think about when I do something like this is, you know, it's an amazing privilege to get to visit, you know, a place like this. It's not something that everybody's able to do, obviously, and it's also very resource intensive. So I'm aware of those contradictions as somebody who, you know, loves the environment and, you know, and is very focused on conservation, that it is a resource intensive trip. But there are some other elements to that too that I'll get to, but I don't want to belabor the point too much right up front. So you can see our points from our eBird lists and the species observed. And I was surprised we're slowly populating our eBird trip report. So now we have, you know, the vast majority of the birds that we saw are actually were photographed as well on the trip. So zooming out a little bit on Africa, you know, we all know that the Sahara Desert is in the north and it's very dry. And then as you move south through the middle of the country, it's much more tropical. And then you know, the East Africa is more grassland, and Central Africa is more rainforest. And then as you go south, again, dryness really characterizes, it's a big aspect. You can't think of Southern Africa without thinking of the deserts. And so zooming in a little bit more, this is the eco-region that we were visiting. It's, we were in Namibia, Botswana, and Zambia, which is actually up here to the north. Hopefully you can see my cursor. It's just to the north west of Zimbabwe. And then we spent a day in South Africa. So here's the way the rough layout. We covered an area taking little snapshots of, it would be something like visiting, you know, 2/3 of the lower 48. You know, you get a feeling, you've been there, but you certainly haven't, you know, experienced the entire environment and the culture and the different towns and all the subtleties. You know, you have a few snapshots, but still, you know, it was a wonderful trip. So we flew in from Johannesburg to Walvis Bay and drove up to Swakopmund and spent 5 nights in Swakopmund. Now I have to say it took me about 4 days to be able to pronounce that. It's a German word. At one point, most of Namibia was a German colony, and it only gained full independence in the early 90s. It was controlled by South Africa for a while. So anyway, so Swakopmund, then we flew to near Waterberg Plateau National Park, stayed there for 3 nights. Then we drove up to Etosha National Park, and we spent 2 nights in Okakuyu, 1 night in Halali, 2 nights in Namatoni. Then we flew in a small plane to Bagani, and this is where reality deviates a little bit from the itinerary photo. This was the map in our itinerary, but we actually stayed at a place called Namaseri Lodge, which was actually their first choice, but because of scheduling, we didn't think that was going to happen, but it came through. And that's on the edge of the northern part of the Okavango Delta. And then we flew to the east central part of the Okavango Delta near Akanaka, up to Kasane. And this is another thing that I didn't realize was such kind of from a logistical standpoint. You have to, go through a border. You can't. It's not like they have, customs everywhere on these little airstrips. So we have to go to a place where you can get stamped out of the country and then get stamped into the next country. And then we spent 2 nights near Livingston, primarily, in the vicinity of Victoria Falls, and then down to Johannesburg. And 4 of us had an extra day, and we spent a day birding just south of Johannesburg. So that's sort of, now I will mention some of the scene shifting throughout. Generally, once we got to Western Namibia on the Atlantic Ocean, we were going generally east, but obviously, drifting north quite a bit for much of the trip as well. So zooming in to the Swakopmund area, these are just points to give you a sense of also what it looks like, but our eBird checklist points. And the red dots are established hotspots. There aren't too many there, eBird hotspots, so the blue dots are just personal locations that I made while I was, when we were traveling around. You can see how dry it is. This is the Namib Desert, so one of the driest places on Earth. Here is Swakopmund, the bustling town. It's actually a nice little town. And even right here, we stayed the 5 nights in the Hansa Hotel and then took day trips out from there. And you could see, just in the garden, pretty small garden in the courtyard. There were already some birds, as we know. That's one of the great things about birds is they're just about everywhere. So we had Cape sparrows. They're close relatives of the house sparrows we're so familiar with. And then there were a lot of regional endemics. So they weren't necessarily endemic to one particular country, but they're endemic to Southern Africa, that kind of just north of Namibia down to the tip of South Africa. That's the region. And a lot of the local birders don't focus so much on their national birding, but they focus on that Southern Africa bioregion. So Orange River White-eye is one of those Southern Africa endemics. And then we had white-backed mousebird. And we also had amazing scenery. The dunes around just inland from the coast are amazing, and they get up to 1,300 feet. There are some very high dunes. Of course, very scenic. And you don't expect a whole lot of birds when you see just nothing but sand, but there are a few. Like this track chat was a very confiding little bird. And then this was one of our local targets too. So Jerry taught botany and ecology at Sac State, and one of the plants that he really wanted to see is a specialty of this region. It's Welwitschia. And it is a gymnosperm, a primitive gymnosperm, and is sometimes referred to as a living fossil. And these plants can grow, can live for 1,500, maybe, or 2,000 years. And it is estimated that this plant might be about 1,000 years old. on the coat of arms for Namibia, have the African fish eagle and the southern oryx, also known as Kemsbok, and then the welwitschia down here. So they take their welwitschia seriously there in Namibia. There are also some other cool things. When we were in the Namib Desert around Swakopmund and Walvis Bay, the birding was slower and the pace was a little slower. And we did a lot of just kind of general naturalist stuff. And we were really fortunate throughout the trip to have great local naturalists at each place we visited. And this is Leon digging and Bruno pointing, and they each have a eco tour companies that they kind of joined forces here to take our group around, and they found plants like this Nara melon and an interesting, very long-legged ground beetle. I think they were digging for geckos here, but they didn't find any. And we explored and learned some about the geology and the different plants in the desert. And it was sometimes foggy in the mornings. And if you have seen a David Attenborough special or any other kind of PBS-like program about the Namib Desert, one of the things you will certainly remember is it rains almost never, but they get a lot of moisture. Well, not a lot, but they get percentage-wise most of the moisture from the fog. So here is some fog on this acacia-like plant. And then we're just exploring around in the barren landscape. It kind of has a feel to me of the area between the Salton Sea and Anza Borrego Desert. And there was a little places where people had done some test mines, and this was a mica test pit. And so there were, this is used in industrial, all sorts of industrial products. And then these really interesting plants. This is Hoodia, that appetite suppressant, and these interesting rock plants. And Bruno was very protective of these locations. So he said, if you take pictures of these with your cell phone, turn off the GPS. So people actually go out and harvest these pretty heavily for like this, the Hoodia for supplements, or some of these rock plants just as potted plants, house plants. And so he guards the locations of these very carefully. And he's had instances where he'd taken people out and then later on they'd come back out and harvested the plant. So he's very cautious about that. So we were fortunate we got to see some of these. And then we were out, most days we were out all day when we were there in the Swakopmund Walvis Bay area, and we just have lunch out in the field. And then there were some birds too. These Rupel's bustards. Bustards is an old world family, and we had quite a few different species of bustards throughout the trip. And these were very infrequently seen on this itinerary. Jeff has been doing it for close to 25 years, and so he's only seen these a couple times, I believe, on the trip. And then, of course, you're in Africa. These ostriches out in the desert. And there were wonderful shorebirds. One thing I meant to say up front is I could easily do 5 talks based on the places we visited and the photos, the thousands and thousands of photos that I took. And I've just done almost a cursory pass through the photos that I have taken to give a representative sample of some of the birds that we saw, the birds, animals, landscapes, plants. And even then, there were a lot of things that I just couldn't fit in. So You're probably fortunate because you don't want to sit here for 5 hours tonight. But on the other hand, it just was an amazing experience that just sort of washed over us, and we, can't can't focus on everything. But great assortment of shorebirds right on the coast. These pied avocets. And then flamingos. We had 2 species of flamingos, the lesser flamingos, and they're a little bit pinker. They're a bit smaller, and they have reddish bills. And then the greater flamingos have these pink bills with the black tips, and they're bigger and paler. And there were lots of both. There were some of the areas we visited were salt concentration ponds, so they were producing both table salt and industrial salt, and they pump through a series of greater and greater concentrations, and then there'd be big piles of salt. And I should have photos of those scenery, but I just didn't have time and room to get all that in here. But there are a lot of water birds using these salt ponds. And then also on the edge of the ocean, big concentrations here of the greater flamingos. I estimated one of the days we had, at least 4,000 flamingos of both species, pretty evenly split. I think we overall saw more of the greater flamingos, but the lesser flamingos tend to be closer in and in some of the more marshy areas. We also had terns and gulls. So here is down a little bit south of Swakopmund, maybe 40-minute drive down to Walvis Bay, and here's an example of some of the salt ponds. And then they get pinker also as you move in as they get higher concentrations. And I believe there's some algae going on. We moved south along the coast, and with the dunes just inland, and these are the different points where made eBird lists. It's kind of an example of some of what we were seeing there. These Damara terns are these tiny little least tern-sized terns. They almost the whole population winters in this area. So speaking of winter, we were there as winter was transitioning into springtime. So there was a fair bit of singing and displaying, and there was also some early migrants arriving. South African shelduck. Swamp hen. As we moved inland, we got into a lot more of the mammal type wildlife, but we had blackback jackals, and then these fur seals along the coast. As we were driving just in from the beach along the sand, the folks Bruno and Leon let most of the air out of their tires, so the tires were could grip the sand better for good traction. We fortunately didn't get stuck out there. This was a real highlight. This is a very isolated or very limited area endemic, the dune lark. It has a very small range. It's, I think, doing pretty well within its range, but it's just has a very narrow range. And we had really nice views, and they played a little bit of song to get the bird to come in, and it actually hovered above us and did a little singing right overhead. And Jeff said it was perhaps the best dune lark experience he's ever had. So we were fortunate to get that. And then Leon did finally find us a gecko. He would look for little ripples in the sand and evidence of some burrowing, and then just gently uncover it, and then we had one of the geckos there. This was perhaps the most common raptor throughout the trip. We saw them nearly every day. Pale chanting goshawk. And we did a little dune climbing for the view and the experience. This is a particularly nice scene. And then just getting some perspective, this is that lagoon, Sandwich Bay it's called, and it has a whaling history. This was a place where whaling ships would come in, and it's changed quite a bit. Even in the time that Bruno had been going out there, he said that the ocean had gotten closer into the dunes, so it was harder to get all the way down to what they call Sandwich Bay here. One of the amazing things, so we were just on the edge of where the dune field really expands, and it gets, I don't know, it goes south about 300 miles and then gets 60 to 80 miles wide. So it's a really extensive dune field. We even did a little dune buggying, which I wasn't expecting. And this doesn't look that intense, but it felt like when we went over the lip, like you were going down just off a 90-degree drop. It was pretty impressive. Then on the edges of the dunes, we started seeing some of the larger mammals, like the springbok and the southern oryx. And they pronounce it looks like gemsbok, but they pronounce it with kind of a coughing H sound, like gemsbok. That was one of the highlights for me, was seeing the oryx. As I did get to go to Tanzania in 2016, and we didn't see an oryx on that trip. But we saw quite a few oryx on this trip. So then up to near the Waterberg area, and the place we stayed for 3 nights was set in this canyon that goes like a finger up into the Waterberg Plateau. There are hyraxes there. And I remember when I was a kid, my dad went to Kenya, and he came back and he was talking about how these were close relatives of elephants. And that's held up. And this was known, I think, based on maybe tooth and foot morphology. It was sussed out. But now with genetic information, there's really interesting discoveries in the last decade plus of the relatedness of some of these African animals, the African mammals. There's this group, you should Google Afrotheres or Afrotheria, and it shows that it's not just elephants and hyraxes, but also aardvarks, sirenians, like the manatees, senjis, which are these funny little elephant shrew things, and even some things like a golden mole. They're all more closely related to each other than any other animals, because Africa was cut off from the rest of what we now consider Eurasia for a long time. So a lot of evolution did its magic there, and that mammal fauna is unique there. Though once, I think it was about 25 million years ago, then it connected up, in the Middle East, and then elephants, obviously they made it into North America. We had mammoths and mastodons, but it's really I could go off on an aside on that more, but I'll just say reading up about Afrotheres is pretty interesting. So we hiked up kind of a very rocky trail looking for some of the endemics around this area. And we did really well. We got really nice looks at rock runner, which is in a very small family. It's a, some of the pictures, the scale is difficult, but it's maybe robin-sized songbird. And we also were looking for Hartlob's spurfowl, which we did get to see, though I didn't get any decent photos of them. And neat shrike-like birds, like these black-backed puffbacks, and some thrushes, brown scraper thrush. There are a few parrots there, like this Ruppel's parrot. And then rhinos, these white rhinos. You can see there's hay on the ground, so it's not exactly a wilderness setting, but it's a big reserve of a few thousand acres. And, the state of rhinos is such that these have armed guards, night and day, 24-hour armed guards. I think there were 6 rhinos and 3 armed guards. And one of them had been relocated from South Africa, where it had been injured in a trap, kind of a bear trap like issue. So, poaching of rhinos has really taken off. It's organized crime is involved, and they can get 100,000 plus for the horns, and so it's really terrible, for those of us, like all of us, I'm sure on this talk, love these big animals like this, and it's really a tragedy, and it's hard to compete with the amount of money that is available in the trade of rhino horn. And rhino horn has been, and African rhinos have been traded to Asia for over 1,000 years. It's thought. There have been trading ships going from Indonesia to East Africa for a long time. So, but the scale of this is just, almost industrial scale. And even in the parks, I read in part because of the pandemic, and this is one of the things about this kind of travel. I'm not naive enough to think ecotourism is going to save the world or anything, and it has its own problems and impacts. But having people there, caring about them, seeing them, putting money into local economies is something that does protect these animals. And during the pandemic, I think it was actually 2022. So just because of reduced visitation, it was one of the factors why in Etosha National Park, 46 rhinos were poached out of there. So it's really a problem. So just onto rhinos in general. This is these are white rhinos. They have these. They're also known as square-lipped rhinos. They're primarily grazers. They're larger than the black rhino, and they're both the same, pretty much the same color. So I don't know why the black rhino is called black rhino, but white rhino, apparently it's a translation, so to speak, or mishearing of the Afrikaans word that means wide, referring to the square lips. And the black rhinos are often called hook-lipped rhinos. They're more of a browser on shrubs and getting new growth. And so they have a different mouth structure. And they're also just only about 2/3 the size of the white rhino. More nice birds, like we had a lot of these pearl-spotted owlets. It's in the same genus as our pygmy owls. And then scops owls, they're kind of like screech owls. Our screech owls genus is megascops. So and this is, I think, a little smaller than our like the western screech owls around here. And just up on the rocky cliffs, this baboon was perched up there. We saw quite a few baboons, some fairly close in, and they didn't bother us, though. They said, make sure to lock your rooms, don't leave anything outside, because the baboons, and then later on when we got into vervet monkey territory, both of these species of monkeys will, investigate your stuff. They also have some pretty good teeth. These are really common. They're in the Turako family. They're a large bird, and they were one that we saw a lot. And after a while, it's like, oh, wait, stop, what's that? And then, oh, it's another go away bird, and then you go a mile that, wait, there's something, oh, it's another go away bird. They're super common, very cool bird, but after a while when you're looking for new stuff, or you think you have a raptor or a hornbill perched up or something, and then it's another go away bird. There's a really nice assortment of these sunbirds. They're sort of the semi-ecological equivalent of our hummingbirds. They're nectar feeders. They have long pointed bills. It's interesting that they also have these iridescent throat patches like our hummingbirds, but they don't fly nearly as acrobatically as our hummingbirds. This is another photo where it looks like it could be a pretty large bird, but it's this short-tailed bird. It's a Cape crombeck, and they're maybe the size of a red-breasted nuthatch. Kind of similar behavior too. And we had a few different species of African barbets. This is the pied barbet. And then these are really beautiful lilac-breasted rollers. They were fairly common along roadsides. So we drove up maybe a couple-hour drive to get to Okavango, where we stayed 2 nights. And this is on what they call the Etosha Pan. Here, like if you were in Nevada, you'd call it a dry lake or a salt pan. But in Southern Africa, they call these features pans. And it is about 80 miles wide and 40 or 50 miles high. And the whole Etosha National Park is twice the size of Yellowstone. It's about over 5 million acres. So the way the park works is you go to what they call these camps, and you can walk around in there, and there's a little bit of habitat, but anywhere you go around in the main park, you have to stay in the vehicle, with the exception of there are a few places where they have fenced bathrooms. But one of the features was really noticeable. It looks like we're standing under this thing that's about to fall, but I think we're not quite directly under it here. But it's these big communal nests of the sociable weavers. And one of the best things about particularly this camp, Okavango, is they have a waterfall right on the edge of the camp. So the camp is fenced, and you can go and stand right at the edge. And it's a natural depression, but they add water. So it's a dependable site, and you can see how barren it is. It's actually pretty amazing driving around in Etosha, especially the western side of Etosha National Park, and seeing how dry it is and how even barren of vegetation it is, and how these animals, incredible numbers of these large animals. It's not quite as overwhelming in numbers as you get in East Africa, where there's a lot of grassland, where it's unbroken grassland. But here, an immense area, but really high numbers of large animals, and it's hard to imagine how they're able to get enough resources off the land. And this is probably once they do get the rain that they do, obviously there'll be more resources for them, but water is one of the big limiting factors. And so having this site here brings in these animals, and it's a great place to watch them. And they're fairly habituated, and even they're pretty habituated to vehicles when you're out driving. You can't be out at night. The park staff assumes anyone who's driving around at night is a potential poacher. So the vehicles have to be back before dark. With the exception is we did do one night drive that was organized by the Park Service, and they took us on the night drive. Even the birds are there. The Cory bustard is the either the largest or tied with the largest flighted bird, so they can be over 40 pounds. And then this plover-like bird is a blacksmith's lapwing. They're super common. And then as it got dark, more animals were coming in. And then one of the highlights of the trip for me, probably the number one most unexpected thing, was the behavior that we got to observe, especially that first night at Okavango. Spent about 2.5 hours watching these rhinos. There were 6 black rhinos and 1 white rhino that came in. And the black rhinos in particular were, the behavior was as wonderful as anything you could see in a nature documentary. So often, you see these nature documentaries and it's, 2 months of filming and they edit it down to, a minute and 30 seconds. But this was just, close, and they're very social, which up until fairly recently, the myth about rhinos was that they were grumpy and not social at all. But especially after dark, they come in. At one point, we had 5 of them nose to nose. We had a female with a large calf that nursed. And then we had these 2. The one on the right is presumably a female. And it seemed like she was testing out these 2 males. And this was the largest of the 2. He has 2 giant horns. And then the slightly smaller male, she actually spent more time with him, or maybe he was more assertive, but they would joust and kind of clack horns together. And she would poke them under the chin a lot and then kind of walk around, and they would chase her around. And of course, elephants are coming in to drink, and giraffes and hyenas and a Cape fox at one point. Just an amazing place. Able to get a little bit of video and see kind of how delicate they can be. That you poke them in the chin quite a bit. So then here she is with the slightly smaller male, and he has mating on his mind, and she's not quite ready for that, apparently. So here's the Southern Cross. These 2 stars, the folks there were referring to these as the pointer stars. They come down, and this is the cross down here. So these 4 stars, it's on its side. And due south is somewhere over here to the left. But it's a pretty good indicator of southern direction. Pointer stars and the cross here on its side. There's a great diversity of larks. You know, here in North America, we have the horned lark, but they have a lot of species of larks, and this is just a small representation of them. We went out in the morning, and one of our targets was the larks. And we also had aardwolf, which was totally unexpected. This is supposed to be a strictly nocturnal species. So that was a great surprise in terms of the mammals. They're hyena and the hyena family, but they're only about 25 pounds, and they're primarily termite eaters. More bustards. This is our really nice view of the white-quilled bustard. And here's the male. Had a few different mongoose species. This was a real surprise. We saw some movement way off on the horizon, and then it kept getting closer and closer. And finally, about now, you're like, well, it's a cat. I think it's a African wildcat. And sure enough, this is relative, or depending on the taxonomist, either the same species or closely related to the species that derive domestic cats. And these are really cool. The only gazelle-like antelope that were there. And their scientific name, the specific epithet, is marsupialis, because they have this pouch on their back that they open up. So it's not like a pouch of a kangaroo, but it's on their back, and it's used for display. And they will do this, what's called pronking behavior, where they jump way up in the air. And Lynette was one of the people on our trip, and she got this great action shot of one just going by, and there was a string of them moving by, and how she got a shot of one leaping in the air was amazing. But they go along and then periodically bounce up in the air, and they will sometimes open this pouch. And it's thought, hypothesized anyway, that it could have a few different functions. It can signal perhaps to a mate. It could also signal danger, flashing all that white. And then the pronking behavior, that leaping, could signal fitness to a potential mate. It also could signal fitness to a potential, a lion or a leopard, and saying, look, if I can do this, good luck trying to catch me. And, a lot of predation is based on surprise. And so when they can signal that they have seen the predator and they're very fit, they can leap in the air like that, they're unlikely to be captured. There was a period of dust storms, but still, just this kind of iconic views everywhere, with giraffes and oryx in the background, and the springbok and zebras. Looking out on the pan, and these were the kind of areas we had bathroom stops. They'd be fenced in, pretty wimpy fences, and one of them, the elephants had just gone through it. But it gives you, I guess, a little sense of security, since there are lions out there and things. And the restrooms were not in the greatest shape, and so oftentimes the guys would go kind of over on the other side of the bus, and the women would go the other way, or maybe if the restrooms were in decent working order, that would be a better option. Here is Jeff's playing the song for rufous-eared warbler, and we didn't find it at that spot. We did find one later. And then outside one of the bathrooms was this little puff adder. So this was, I think, the only at least live snake that we saw. And that was cool to see, though it was fortunate that, it wasn't, that it was seen before it was stepped on. They're highly venomous. And then in the little clumps of trees around, at least 2 locations where, and I think actually 3 sites where we had the red-necked falcons. And Ken was talking about shrikes in the beginning, and it's called a fiscal, but it's a shrike. It's the same genus as our loggerhead shrike. And then this is also a different genus, but it's also in the shrike family. And then one of my highlights for me was seeing the diversity of hornbills. Such a great group of birds. And then in the waterholes, another highlight was the kudu, another one of the antelope. We had 17 species of antelope. This is a impala here in the foreground, and then the kudu are these beautiful striped antelope with dramatically shaped horns. There's the black-faced impala. It's a different subspecies than the impala that you see in East Africa, which is called the common impala. And then steenbok, very small antelope, usually in pairs. Zebras at the waterhole. There were quite a few different waterhole visits and experiences. So oryx again. Red hartebeest. And then the smallest antelope of them all, the dik-dik. They're also usually in pairs. Whoops. And they have, most of the antelope, many of the antelopes scent mark, and they have a little scent organ here. And I saw them in Tanzania doing it, and it looks like they're going to poke their eye out on a stick. But they have this kind of mucousy substance that has a scent in it, and they'll mark on the edge of sticks or the tips of sticks. Looks like they're going to poke their eye out. But they live in these little territories, and they know their territories really well. They have pathways and hiding spots and things. So when animals like hyenas and stuff come, they're able to hide. And then this is another family, the helmet shrike. We had the white helmet shrike and Retz's helmet shrike also on this trip. Not just birds and mammals, we're interested in everything, though there weren't as many reptiles to see. This is a local variation of agama lizards. Blends in very well with the rocks there. And speaking of hyenas, so from Namatoni, we flew up to Bagani, and then we stayed not at this lodge, which was in the itinerary, but the place they actually wanted us to stay in the first place. They were able to get us down here at Namaseri. And I don't have time to go into the craziness of this day, but when we got to the airport, the people who were to pick us up weren't there. And it was actually a trip with a bus, plane, game drive vehicle, taxi, another game drive vehicle, and a boat before we actually got to the lodge. There's an example of the kind of plane flights. There's Francis Oliver and John Blades getting off the plane. Here's Jeff and John Blades and Dave. And Jeff had rolled his pants up, or no, I think he had shorts on, but he took his shoes and socks off to help. We were too heavy in the boat to actually get going, so he pushed us off. And so this is right here is the border between Namibia and Botswana. And so we drove from the border down and then got the boat ride out to the island. It was a wonderful place. It's probably my favorite single place that we stayed was the Namasari Island Lodge in what they call the Panhandle section of the Okavango Delta. Here it spreads out, and then it just the Okavango River is a pretty sizable river, but it doesn't make it to the ocean. It just ends here in the desert, but it's incredibly rich environment. And it incorporated built the lodge in and around this tree. We did a lot of boat trips there. We were there for 3 nights at Namasari, seeing things like darters, more barbets. This was a highlight for me. I've been, I think, 4 times before in areas where you might see button quail, and finally did see button quail. They're in their own family. They're not closely related to quail at all. They're more closely related to sandpipers. Nice diversity of bee eaters. We saw 4 or 5 species. Great little birds. And good diversity of lapwings too. I could go on, a riff about so many of these things. I'm just kind of giving you a flavor of what we had, and some amazing groups of birds I have to skip entirely because there's just not enough time. But there's a lot of really colorful starlings, and these were probably the showiest of the lot, the blue-eared starlings. Great kingfishers too. The malachite kingfisher is a tiny little thing. The staff at Namasari are wonderful. There's Jerry and 2 of the guides, Adam and Mr. P. It's on his name tag. It's just Mr. and the letter P. And they were incredibly helpful. And one of the highlight birds for the trip, and what Jeff, I think, sees as sort of the flagship species, and if you miss it, it would be a real letdown, is the Pell's fishing owl. And we looked for them for an hour and a half or so and didn't find it. And then during lunchtime, Adam and Mr. P took it upon themselves to go, off the island to another location and track one down and then get us all out there. It was a long kind of logistical slog with a couple of Makoro ride, which is like a canoe, but the person stands up and pulls it, and we were able to get a view of the Pell's fishing owl. And it's a huge owl. It's significantly larger than a great horned owl. Another hornbill. So then from Namasari, we flew over to Akanaka. And we had to, Mr. P and Adam had to chase the goats off the runway so the plane that was picking us up could land. And then here we're flying over the Okavango River. This kind of airstrip that we landed. There were several camps throughout the the delta, and it's good. It does. There's pressure to increase grazing in this region, but if it makes economic sense to keep these camps for ecotourism, it does protect the habitat more. So once we landed, then we were out on these vehicles, these open vehicles like this. This was an amazing experience because the elephant was in just coming down the middle of the road, and the driver, you have to trust that they know what they're doing. This animal is way bigger than the vehicle, and it passed Dave, who had the photo of Adam and Mr. P. He has a wonderful series of photos too that he took it's on his Flickr page. But anyway, this elephant got within about 3 feet of him. He was in the back right of the vehicle. And it was, the photo's fun. It gives you a sense, but hearing them and kind of the groans and the breathing and you could hear the flapping of the ears. It's just an amazing experience. Not a ton of woodpeckers on this trip, but we had a few species, and this Bennett's woodpecker will stand in for that. Another Glaucidium or pygmy owl type genus owl, the barred owlet. These are really beautiful singers. Fairly conspicuous bird. And this animal was just right on the side of the road, and then our only full day around Akanaka. We appreciated him for a while, and then while we were appreciating him, I don't think he was necessarily appreciating us. So he did, after a while, he stood up and walked into the grass. And then, when you're out in these things, the vehicles, they have radios, and so they got a note on the radio that there was lions were taking down a Cape buffalo. But on the way, we saw these wonderful birds, ground hornbills. They're about the size of a female turkey. And then we got to the kill. This lioness came in while the rest were already feeding, and there was a bit of snarling and growling, but she finally found a spot that the others tolerated. And this just blows me away, the muscle strength in the shoulder of this animal. You can just see the power in that shoulder. So it's pretty amazing scene. It's kind of disgusting. These lions on the left ended up covered in feces, because they were going in from the rear. But it is that's part of the life there. Then there was a dead elephant that was covered in vultures. It was stinky too. It had been dead for a while. and marabou storks were there. Such an odd creature. Rainbow skinks. This is definitely a highlight. I really wanted to see the carmine bee eaters. More another species of antelope. This is a water adapted species, the red lichway. Lots of vervet monkeys. This was, we only saw one leopard on the trip, but seeing a leopard is always a highlight. And, you know, we saw it sleeping. So, you know, it's not the greatest view. This was a late morning. And so we came back in the afternoon and was awake. And our driver said, you know, maybe we ought to just stay here and see what happens. And so we stayed about 20 minutes, and folks started getting restless. And, you know, we're birders as well as mammal watchers. So, you know, we went over to some wetlands and then got a call that she was down hunting. And we came back, and she had caught a vervet monkey. And I was showing this to my mom last weekend before, and I know she was kind of disturbed by some of this. So I won't leave it for a long time on that scene, but I'll go back to it in a second. But we learned there was one vehicle that stayed the whole time, and they told us what happened. So she got down and then went up an adjacent tree, and there were 2 or 3 monkeys up there, but 2 stuck it out, and they were up way high in the tree. And she started climbing up toward them, and they were on really thin branches where she was too heavy to get to them. But the monkeys started to lose their nerve, and one of them just leapt out into space, and it made it and caught a branch on an adjacent tree, and, you know, was in the adjacent tree. Then the next monkey similarly lost its nerve and leapt, and it grabbed the branch, but it slipped through its hand and it hit the ground. And the person actually had a video of this and showed it. The monkey hit the ground, immediately started up the trunk of that tree, and before it got, you know, more than 10 feet off the ground, the leopard had it. So she came down the tree and back up the other tree before the monkey could get from the ground up. But yeah, and then, you know, we watched her carry this monkey, and it was thought that she had a cub somewhere, and she was taking it to the cub. So from Akanaka, we flew to Kasane, cleared customs, and then flew to Livingston, which was near the Victoria Falls. And there are 3 amazing waterfalls on pretty good sized rivers in the world, and this is one of them. There's Iguazu Falls on the Brazilian-Argentinian border, and then there's Niagara Falls, of course. But it's one of the 7 natural wonders of the world, I believe. Note this this part of the stream here. So that's this, and these folks are fishing up here. So you need to be very sure-footed if you're going to fish right above that waterfall. Just around the area, we had say a pair of Peter's twin spots, but I could only get a photo of the female. This is sort of a placeholder for all the different cisticolas we had. It's near the river. And then this is another of innumerable highlights was this Shawlow's Turako. It's a large bird, quite large and incredibly flashy. And this is not shabby either. It's gray-headed bush shrike. It's a very large for a songbird. You know, it's maybe almost like, I want to say like yellow-billed magpie size, but without the long tail. I mean, they're very large gray-headed bush shrike. They're wonderful hornbill. This is one of the showier ones, and we got really nice views of them. And then after that, we the following day, our last full day of the main trip, we took a boat trip on the Zambezi River above the falls. You know, it's one of those things where you don't want the outboard to go out, but it was really cool. We actually passed into Zimbabwe and ate lunch. According to GPS, we were on an island in Zimbabwe. Got 33 species of birds in Zimbabwe. And along the riverside with this elephant dung here, there's water thickney, another lapwing. These strange wattles. There's another species that's similar to this called a wattled lapwing that we also saw, but not quite as close. And then these were very cool. This is the male up above and the female. And female are immature. I think it's an adult female. But there's the sun grebe and that African finfoot, and then the Asian finfoot. There's another common name for it also, but it's highly endangered. There are only 3 species in this family, and they're pretty tricky to find. Apparently, this area on the Zambezi is probably the most straightforward place to find them. And then for 4 of us, we had a great day just south of Johannesburg at the, try to pronounce it, Suikersporen, something like that. It means sugar bush mountain or sugar bush range. Refers to protea. We saw some protea plants, but they weren't blooming. But here we had these aloes and cabbage trees and nice, regional endemics. And the wryneck, this is a woodpecker relative. It's in the woodpecker family. It's just one of 2 species of wrynecks. And when they're threatened, they do this weird display where they move their head around in this kind of snaky manner. That's where they got the common name of wryneck. Fairy flycatcher, and it gives you a feel of a gnatcatcher almost. And distantly, we had blessbook. This is our 17th species of antelope. And this is my last slide as sunset just upstream of the Victoria Falls on the Zambezi River. And I'm happy to take any questions at that point, and I'll turn it back over to Ken and Ann.
Excuse me. Hey, thanks, Chris. Great. Really appreciate you going through that. And yeah, what a very, varied, a lot of experiences on that trip. Very cool. Let's see, folks, are there any questions for Chris? I had a question along the way and I didn't put it down. You may have mentioned it. The turtles, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Are they kind of related to chacalacas?
Oh, like the spur fowl and the francolins, those, or
No, the other
oh,
one.
you mean, yeah, because they're the chachalacas are just kind of a Central American and South American group.
Uh-huh.
So they have a similar. I'm not sure which species you were referring to.
Yeah, it was similar in terms of silhouette, body, long
Yeah,
tail.
maybe the
Yeah.
go away bird.
Yeah, something. Yeah, that was the first one that reminded me of it. The go away bird.
Yeah, that was yeah, they're related to the Turacos. Like they're in the
Turacos, yeah.
same family, but they're
Yeah.
uh yeah, not those aren't particularly colorful, but they're
Mhm.
really interesting.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Yeah, Christine wants to know, were there any elephants hanging out near the one that passed away? She had heard that they hang out for a long time, I guess, in mourning, I guess.
We didn't see that there. There were elephants in the area, but I'm guessing it, not that I can really, this is just a wild guess, but I'd say it had been dead for probably close to a week.
So they probably paid their respects, said what they have to say to it, and then moved on. Yeah, cool. Okay, I'm just trying to see if there's any more. On hanging out, sitting around with the leopard for a while, how far away was the vehicle? I mean, was there some sense of some of your co-passengers of kind of annoying the leopard or kind of invading its space?
Yeah, I was really concerned about that. And we actually didn't, when we came back, we didn't want to follow it as long as our drivers were willing to take us. And I think based on the way they behave, they seem fully habituated to the vehicle.
Mm.
They would actually, when a vehicle moved by, they would just sort of wait and then walk. And there was, for aesthetically, some of it bothered me a little bit. There was a Disney-ish quality to the when there's a kill and there's like a dozen vehicles surrounding it.
Yeah.
But they're very cognizant of, and the folks who run the operation seem to know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of trust in the way they handled it.
Good.
But yeah, it's different than a lot of it. Like when we were in Etosha, we were just completely on our own, finding kind of our own stuff. But that when we were out of the Akanaka Lodge in particular, there was more traffic, and they were calling in things on the radio to see, but it didn't seem to be harming the animals. And you kind of ease your conscience also by thinking, well, this is providing an incentive to preserve this habitat, and the animals seem to be doing okay with it.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm going to say one last thing, and then I will. Oh, here's a question. Susan wants to know, how many common birds versus rare birds did you see?
That's a good question, because when you're traveling like that and it's your first time to a region, everything is brand new.
Yeah.
There are things like the dune lark, which you only find within a very narrow strip of it, and that is one that's just restricted to Namibia and a very narrow area of Namibia. I would probably have to, look into that more. I know some, like the Damara tern and the chestnut, was it chestnut breasted plover? They're chestnut banded plover. They're almost their entire population winters right in that area. So they're fairly numerous right there, but they're not they're not widespread, and they're
Mhm.
obviously dependent upon that type of habitat being intact.
Okay. Right. Thank you. So there are no more questions, folks. I want to close by saying thank you again, Chris, and thank you. Just other folks have said thank you, and I just wanted to appreciate you're taking the time to share with us this trip. Sounds like a very cool thing to do. I won't do it, especially because it takes 3 days to get there. I can, yeah. I think that's what keeps me from going beyond Dixon. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, you're welcome.
And,
it's my pleasure. It's fun to share.
Just thank you for doing that. And
I just wanted to mention. Sorry?
President N, what can
Oh.
you?
I just wanted to mention again the Central Valley Bird Symposium coming up. And what are the dates of that, Chris?
I should have it memorized, but I'm looking right now. It's the weekend before Thanksgiving. So it's the evening of Thursday, the 16th of November, all day Friday, all day Saturday and Sunday.
It's just
and you can come for the whole thing or just for a day.
It's a great event, and they've been doing it a long time. And you all support this event. We're sponsors of it, and we doubled our donation this year. And so take advantage and enjoy it. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. All right, then. No more last minute questions. Chris, I'll let you get back to your evening. And let everyone else, I wish you all a great rest of the evening. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Ken.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Night.